This was the moment a woman was attacked by her pet cat who'd been friendly for years, showing how animals that seem completely safe can suddenly turn without warning. In many cases like this, the aggression isn't random at all. Cats are extremely good at hiding pain, and when something is wrong internally, it can build up until they react suddenly and violently. Undiagnosed injuries, infections, dental disease, or even arthritis can cause them to abruptly lash out at the person closest to them. There's also something called redirected aggression, where a cat becomes triggered by something like another animal or loud noise, but ends up attacking their owner instead. Veterinarians say that sudden, uncharacteristic aggression in cats is often one of the clearest signs that something is medically wrong. In many cases, these attacks end with the owner needing stitches or hospital treatment. In 1991, on Kawagarbo, a sacred mountain in Tibetan Buddhism, a Japanese-Chinese expedition attempted to summit the peak, which had never been climbed. But an avalanche suddenly struck their camp, killing all 17 members. After the disaster, climbing was banned, and Kawagarbo remains one of the highest unclimbed mountains in the world. Bernie Madoff, the architect behind one of the largest financial frauds in history, died in 2021 while serving a 150-year sentence at the Federal Medical Center in North Carolina. Despite traditional Jewish burial customs, he was cremated and his family refused to claim his remains. His ashes were instead sent to a law office in New York, where they reportedly remain unclaimed, sitting in storage years after his death. Before Jeffrey Epstein, there was John David Norman. In the early 1970s, across multiple U.S. states, Norman operated a trafficking network that exploited hundreds of boys, many of them vulnerable runaways or teenagers with no one looking for them. He built detailed lists of victims and buyers, distributing names, photos, and access through underground mail systems that connected offenders across state lines. Investigators later uncovered links between Norman's network and serial killers John Wayne Gacy and Dean Corll, both of whom were active during the same time and targeted young boys. When authorities seized Norman's materials, they reportedly found records suggesting his client lists extended far beyond local offenders, with names believed to include individuals in positions of power, including federal employees. But in 1977, key records tied to those clients were destroyed by the Justice Department, effectively erasing the identities of many who may have been involved. Norman would go on to be arrested multiple times, but was never prosecuted, as much of the network he helped build was never fully uncovered. In 2017, in Ottawa, Canada, model Kat Gallinger underwent a sclera tattoo, a rare and controversial procedure where ink is injected directly into the white of the eye. The person performing it reportedly used far too much ink and improper technique, causing purple dye to leak from her eye and triggering a serious infection. Despite emergency treatment and months of complications, she was left with permanent vision damage and a dangerously thin sclera, putting her at risk of losing the eye entirely. She later revealed the pain was excruciatingly constant, with fluid continuing to seep from her eye for several weeks, and has since spoken out to warn others about the risks of unregulated body modifications. In 2012 in Wisconsin, Dale Decker suffered a slip disc that triggered a rare neurological condition known as persistent genital arousal disorder. The disorder caused him to experience dozens, sometimes over 100, involuntary orgasms a day without any stimulation, often striking in public or at inappropriate moments. He later said the episodes took over his life, disrupting his ability to work, maintain relationships, and even grieve properly, with attacks occurring during critical moments, including his own father's funeral. In October of 2006, 18-year-old Nikki Katsouris died after crashing her father's Porsche 911 Carrera at more than 100 miles per hour on a California freeway. The impact was so catastrophic that her body remained strapped in the driver's seat, but her head was no longer attached. The scene was so graphic that the coroner advised her parents not to identify the body. But in the aftermath, 2 California Highway Patrol employees improperly leaked photographs of the accident that quickly spread across the internet, appearing on forums and shock sites. Strangers later began anonymously emailing the horrific images directly to the grieving Katsouris family. The family later pursued legal action against the California Highway Patrol, and in 2012 the state reached a settlement with them over the unauthorized release of the photos. In 1974, 6-year-old Gary Ray Hose ran away from home to escape alleged abuse from his parents. Police soon returned the boy to his household, but he was never seen again. Years later, his older brothers told investigators that their mother had beaten Gary to death shortly after he was brought back and buried his body somewhere on the family's remote desert property. Despite searches and the disturbing testimony, Gary's remains have never been found, leaving the case unresolved and the exact circumstances of his death unknown. In 1998, 14-year-old Josh Phillips was playing baseball outside of his Jacksonville, Florida home when the ball suddenly struck his 8-year-old neighbor, Maddie Clifton, in the eye. Fearing the reaction of his abusive father, Phillips strangled Maddie inside his house, then dragged her body to his bedroom and hid her beneath his waterbed. For 7 days, as a massive search unfolded across the neighborhood, her body remained concealed just feet away from where family, friends, and volunteers gathered, unaware she was right inside the home the entire time. The crime was discovered after a strong odor led Phillips's mother to check under the bed. He was arrested and later convicted of first-degree murder. He remains incarcerated to this day. During the Vietnam War, U.S. Marine sniper Chuck Mahoney recorded 103 confirmed kills, the most in Marine Corps history. Operating in dense jungle terrain, he was known for precision and patience. And in one documented engagement, he recorded 16 confirmed headshot kills in roughly 30 seconds during an ambush. But unlike many wartime figures, Mahoney returned home and quietly left the Corps, taking a job with the U.S. Forest Service. For more than 2 decades, he told virtually no one, not even his own wife, about his record or role in Vietnam. His service only became widely known years later, when former comrades and military records brought his history to light. Florida high school principal Dr. George Kenny built a devoted following by hypnotizing students to boost confidence and performance despite not being licensed. But in 2011, 3 teens he had worked with died within months of each other, 1 in a car crash and 2 by suicide, raising alarm from families who believed the hypnosis may have caused psychological harm. Investigators never proved a direct link to the deaths, but Kenny was charged with practicing hypnosis without a license, pleaded no contest, and resigned in 2012. Lawsuits from the victims' families ended in settlements, while Kenny quietly left Florida and withdrew from public life, leaving the controversy unresolved. John C. Woods, the U.S. Army hangman who carried out the executions of Nazis at the Nuremberg trials, completely lied about his qualifications to get the job, claiming prior experience as an executioner when none of it could later be verified. As a result of his incompetence, several condemned Nazi officials did not die from a clean neck break, which is the intended outcome of a properly calculated drop. Instead, multiple prisoners slowly strangled in agony, some taking up to 20 minutes to die while witnesses observed visible suffering. Despite complaints from observers, Woods continued performing executions and was never formally disciplined for the botched hangings. In 2008, Vince Lee boarded a Greyhound bus in Manitoba, Canada, moved seats after a stop, and sat beside 22-year-old Tim McLean, who was asleep against a window with his headphones on. Lee suddenly attacked him with a large knife, stabbing him more than 60 times in the neck, chest, and shoulders, as passengers heard blood-curdling screams and fled the bus in horror. The situation turned into an hours-long standoff, while police waited outside and terrified witnesses watched from a distance. During that time, Lee decapitated McLean, held up his severed head by the hair, and displayed it through the bus window to those outside like a trophy. He then returned to the body, severed other parts, mutilated it further, and consumed portions of McLean's flesh, including reportedly eating his eyes and part of his heart while blood dripped everywhere. Later on, McLean's ear, nose, and tongue were found in Lee's pocket. He was eventually taken into custody and later found not criminally responsible due to untreated schizophrenia. He spent years in a psychiatric facility and was released under supervision, making it one of the most infamous and controversial cases in the history of Canada. This was the moment when a routine day on the slope suddenly spiraled into chaos, when a chairlift at Georgia's Godori Ski Resort malfunctioned and began racing backward down the mountain. The lift reversed at high speed, smashing chairs together at the bottom terminal and violently throwing riders to the ground, while others were forced to jump to avoid being crushed by swinging metal seats. Screams erupted as people piled at the base of the lift, with some narrowly missing being struck by flying chairs and bodies. At least 8 people were seriously injured, including tourists from several countries, with reported injuries ranging from broken limbs to head and spinal trauma. Investigators later concluded the rollback was triggered by an electrical failure, which was only worsened by operator error after emergency procedures were not properly followed. In the aftermath, the lift operator was suspended and resort managers were forced to resign. Criminal and civil investigations later followed, examining how a system designed to keep riders safe turned into a death trap within seconds. In 2015, 32-year-old Ronald Exantis broke into a Kentucky home before dawn, walked upstairs, and stabbed 6-year-old Logan Tipton to death as he slept, then tried to kill the rest of his family, slashing at anyone who tried to stop him until the boy's father tackled him to the floor. Investigators later learned Exantis had entered through the back door, wandered the house, and calmly grabbed a kitchen knife before heading straight to the children's room, leaving behind a scene so violent, officers said it looked like a nightmare you couldn't wake up from. Despite the brutality of the attack, he was found guilty but mentally ill and sentenced to just 20 years. In 2024, he was released 9 years early on good behavior, but the outrage was immediate. Authorities reviewed his release and took him back into custody. As of now, he's expected to be re-released in 2035. Before fame, Shania Twain was already carrying adult burdens as a child, singing in bars until 1 a.m. at the age of 8 just to help keep her family afloat. But in 1987, that fragile stability was suddenly destroyed when her mother and stepfather were killed in a violent car accident after their vehicle was struck head-on by a truck driven by a drunk driver. Shania was only 22 when she became the legal guardian of her 4 younger siblings, putting her music career on hold to raise them and keep the family together, stepping into survival mode years before the world ever knew her name. Christopher Tapp spent more than 20 years in prison for the 1996 murder of 18-year-old Angie Dodge, a crime he didn't commit. Police had coerced a false confession out of him, even though none of the DNA at the scene matched. In 2019, genetic genealogy finally identified the real killer, leading to Tapp's full exoneration and a record-breaking $11.7 million settlement he received in 2022. But less than a year after finally reclaiming his life, Tapp was found beaten and unresponsive in a Las Vegas hotel room after an altercation. The coroner ruled his death a homicide, and a former pro wrestler was later charged. Acclaimed filmmaker and actor Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle Singer Reiner have been found dead in their Brentwood, Los Angeles home in what investigators are investigating as an apparent homicide. Emergency responders discovered the couple inside the residence during a medical aid call when their daughter Romy reportedly found them dead with their throats slit. Their 32-year-old son Nick Reiner was taken into custody and held on $4 million bail in connection with the deaths, though police have not publicly released a confirmed motive. Nick has a well-documented history of long-term drug addiction and periods of homelessness, first entering rehab around age 15 and struggling for years before finally getting clean. He later worked with his father on the 2015 film Being Charlie, which drew on his experiences with addiction and recovery. Rob Reiner was one of Hollywood's most recognizable directors and actors, known for films such as Stand By Me, The Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally, and A Few Good Men. His death alongside his wife's has sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry as authorities continue their investigation. This photo shows 15-year-old Preston Porter Jr. reading a Bible as he's led by rope toward his own execution by a lynch mob in Colorado in 1900. He'd been held and tortured for 4 days, beaten until he finally confessed to killing a white girl after police told him his father and brother would also be lynched if he didn't comply. Still a child, Preston was denied a trial and handed over to a crowd that had already decided his fate. He was tied to a stake and burned alive in public as excited spectators watched. Despite the coerced confession, his age, and the brutality involved, Preston was never posthumously exonerated. No official apology was issued, no conviction was overturned, and no one was held accountable. 7-year-old Tasha Lee Lanham weighed just 12 pounds when she died in Pennsylvania in 1998, a skeletal, severely malnourished child whose body was closer in size and fragility to an infant than a second grader. Investigators determined she hadn't eaten for days, but the autopsy showed the damage was long-term. Almost zero body fat anywhere on her body, growth stunted to the size of a toddler, and teeth completely ground down in patterns medical examiners associate with prolonged starvation. Court records revealed that her mother, Michelle Tharp, had spent years isolating Tasha, deliberately withholding and rationing her food as punishment, and refusing medical care because any doctor would have immediately recognized the abuse. By the end, Tasha was so weak that missing just one more meal was enough to kill her. The medical examiner ruled her death a homicide caused by starvation and described the abuse as equivalent to prolonged torture. Michelle was later sentenced to death for starving her own daughter until her body finally gave out. In 1966, 17-year-old Franca Viola became the center of one of Italy's most disturbing criminal traditions, the matrimonio reparatore, a so-called rehabilitating marriage, where a rapist could escape prosecution by marrying his victim. Franca was kidnapped by Filippo Melodia and held captive for 8 days, during which she was repeatedly assaulted as Melodia and his accomplices tried to force her into the marriage that would legally erase his crimes. But Franca did something that no woman in Italy had ever done before. She said no. Her refusal refusal didn't just defy her attacker, it defied the entire legal system, the cultural norms of her town, and the centuries-old belief that a woman's honor could be restored by marrying the man who raped her. When Franca and her family pressed charges instead, the community turned on them. Their property was burned, they were publicly shamed, and they lived under constant threats for refusing to participate in the ritual that protected rapists. Melodia was eventually convicted of kidnapping, rape, and intimidation, but the law that allowed rapists to walk free by marrying their victims remained in place for another 15 years. Article 544, the clause that effectively turned sexual assault into a negotiable family arrangement, was finally repealed in 1981. This was the moment when a DoorDash delivery driver was caught on camera spraying something into a family's Arby's order, seconds after dropping it off and taking a picture before casually walking away. Indiana man Mark Cardin said when his wife began eating, she immediately started choking, gasping, and vomiting, and her husband noticed a strange residue coating the inside of the bag. After reviewing the footage, he realized the driver had allegedly pepper sprayed the food on purpose for reasons no one can explain. The sheriff's office is now investigating, and the case could lead to a felony consumer product tampering charge, the kind filed when a regular delivery turns into a potentially life-threatening attack. A 10-pound mini dachshund named Valerie vanished during a camping trip on Kangaroo Island, then somehow survived 529 days alone in the Australian bush. Rescuers spent months trying to trap her, stunned that such a tiny house dog had endured snakes, heat, and feral predators long enough to actually gain weight. Some think she lived off roadkill, while others believe someone was feeding her, since no one can explain how she lasted nearly a year and a half in one of the harshest landscapes in the world. When she was finally caught using a trap baited with her favorite toys and her own clothes, vets found her fit and well, closing one of the most improbable pet survival stories ever documented. Here are some morbidly wholesome facts about John Cena. John Cena holds the all-time record for the most Make-A-Wish visits by far, personally granting over 650 wishes for children with life-threatening illnesses. Many of these visits have taken place in intensive care units or hospice settings, oftentimes with children who would pass away weeks or even days later. Hospital staff have said Cena routinely stays far longer than scheduled, sitting with families after cameras are gone, letting kids talk about fear, death, or unfinished dreams while he stayed fully in character as their hero. He's never publicized these encounters himself and refuses to use them for branding, saying he sees them as his life's purpose rather than for charity. Cena has also privately supported veterans suffering from severe PTSD and traumatic brain injuries, including meeting wounded soldiers who believed their lives were over due to permanent disabilities. Several veterans later said those conversations with the wrestling legend single-handedly saved their life. Cena has consistently avoided receiving any public credit for these interactions. In 2022, Kazuki Takahashi, the creator of Yu-Gi-Oh!, drowned off the coast of Okinawa while trying to save a woman, her child, and a U.S. soldier who were trapped in a violent rip current. Witnesses watched him jump into 6-foot waves and swim toward the struggling swimmers as the water twisted into a whirlpool. The soldier ultimately pulled the victims to safety, but Takahashi was overtaken by the current and vanished beneath the surf. His body was found 2 days later, still in snorkeling gear, and investigators confirmed he died during the rescue attempt. Anthony Olson spent 9 years being poisoned by chemotherapy for a cancer he never had. In 2011, doctors told the 21-year-old he had a deadly blood disorder and wouldn't live to see the next year without aggressive treatment. When a follow-up biopsy came back completely normal, he was told to ignore it because it meant the chemo was working. For nearly a decade, he endured transfusions, crippling side effects, and the emotional fallout of believing he was dying, all while the original diagnosis was wrong. Later reviews showed Anthony never even had cancer at any point, meaning every drop of chemotherapy and emotional turmoil was unnecessary. By the time the mistake was uncovered, the treatment had already reshaped his entire life. A 5-year-old kindergartner in Standish, Maine was recently killed after his arm became trapped in the closing doors of his school bus as it pulled away from his morning stop, leaving him pinned to the vehicle and dragged nearly 300 feet along the pavement. Investigators determined the driver was unaware the child was caught and continued driving until other motorists began frantically signaling that something was wrong. The child eventually lost his grip, fell into the roadway, and was run over by the same bus, suffering catastrophic injuries and dying at the scene. The bus driver, a 64-year-old woman, was placed on administrative leave and no charges were filed. The tragic death was ruled accidental, but the case triggered an investigation by the National Transportation Safety Board after it was confirmed the bus's door systems failed to detect the child before the vehicle moved, raising concerns about blind spots, sensor limitations, and school bus loading zone safety. In Flint, Michigan in 1978, 14-month-old Keith Edmonds was crying in his crib when his mother's boyfriend lost control and forced the baby's face against a red-hot electric heater. The metal burned so deeply that half of Keith's face suffered third-degree burns. Doctors said the damage destroyed one eye, severely injured the other, and left his face permanently disfigured. He underwent years of surgeries, skin grafts, and hospital treatment just to survive. The attacker was convicted of severe child abuse and sentenced to 10 years in prison, while Keith spent most of his childhood in hospitals and foster care before eventually reuniting with his mother. Haunted by the trauma, he later struggled with addiction into adulthood but managed to turn his life around at age 35. In 2016, he founded the Keith Edmonds Foundation, which now helps abused and neglected children through various programs. Here's some extremely rare footage of a giant squid feeding on a much smaller squid. For centuries, giant squid were dismissed as pure myth, nothing more than sailor legends like the Kraken. Their existence wasn't even scientifically accepted until 1857, and humans didn't film one alive in the deep sea until 2012. Even today, they remain among the least observed large animals on Earth. They live thousands of feet below the surface in near total darkness, and almost no one in history has ever seen one actively hunting, let alone captured it on video. Here's an extremely rare compilation of wild animals shedding their antlers. Antlers are one of the fastest growing bones in the animal kingdom, and unlike horns, they're designed to fall off and regrow every year. While antlers are growing, they're covered in a soft, blood-rich skin called velvet that supplies oxygen and nutrients to the developing bone. Once the antlers reach full size, rising testosterone levels cut off that blood supply, the velvet dies, and the animal rubs it off against trees and brush to expose the hardened bone beneath. After mating season ends, hormone levels drop again, the bone weakens at the base, and the entire antler eventually detaches and breaks away. This cycle allows deer, elk, and moose to grow a completely new set of antlers each year, often larger than the last.